Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of Developer Tea. This is the second part of my interview with Bryan McCann, the CTO at U.com. If you haven't listened to the first episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to that. There may be parts of this that make a little more sense based on that one. In this episode, we talk quite a bit about how you can think about, at kind of a broader level, how you can think about how to integrate or how to relate to all of the changes that are happening to your job as a result of AI, and we talk about a handful of other things as well. Bryan has been on the ground floor in the research of AI, but he is not just interested in that, and we talk about some of his other interests in this episode. By the way, we mentioned this in the last episode. U.com is hiring. They didn't ask me to say that, but I noticed recently, I think it was on LinkedIn or something, that they are indeed hiring. So if you enjoy this discussion with Bryan, if you like the philosophy, if you think you would work well on a team led by somebody like Bryan, go and apply. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. Let's get straight into our interview with Bryan McCann. So you mentioned that you're interested in both art and organizations, and these are two areas that I think headline after headline would support the idea that AI is touching these things. It's changing how we think about organization, and it's changing how we think about art. Mm-hmm. If you had to kind of summarize or make a single statement about how you're thinking about AI and its interaction with organizations, what do you think? Especially for the listeners who downloaded this episode, there's a bunch of software engineers here, right? There's software engineers, there's engineering managers, and there's directors and product folks, and they're trying to conceptualize what the future of their work looks like. Maybe next year, maybe in 5 years, 10 years, and it seems like it's changing rapidly. What do you think is, I guess, where do you think we're headed? Maybe is the right question.
Yeah, I think much of what people are saying is likely true. It is getting easier and easier to build things that have been built before, at least. I think that it's going to be, I don't know, this might sound almost paradoxical, but I do think, in some sense, if you're very application driven, the process of executing is going to get easier and easier and easier. We will be able to automate more and more things away. And I think for developers specifically, there's kind of two directions in the long run. One, you start thinking of yourself primarily as what we might describe now more as like a manager of these tools, these AIs, maybe more like a product manager with a lot of engineering insight and experience. But you can think of yourself as application driven, and you're just going to accelerate your ability to build what you like more and more. So in that sense, it also becomes more and more important to refine your intuitions about what should be built. And you can think a lot about those things. You can kind of spend your time refining how you ask those questions and how you discover what to build. And AI can help with those things too. Right? It's very good at that kind of research. Or you go in the second direction, which is you keep trying to be better than AI at the building itself. You keep trying to eventually, most likely, be better at making AI better. If we try to project forward, and AI is able to build essentially most things, except now we're having AI build itself. People who can still build AI better than AI can build itself are going to be almost like neurosurgeons, in human society or something. It's like, wow, we don't really know what's going on in the brain sometimes, but like if you can go in and you can make an improvement even if it's high risk, like that is extremely valuable. You're paid extremely well for it. It's a very specialized skill, but like you can kind of be the person making all the tools better, or you can be the one on the other side using the fact that they're all getting better to actually do the things in the world. I don't think either one is inherently better. Right now, there you see kind of widening disparity between people who continue to do things normally and people who think on either end of the spectrum. You see the top AI researchers, there's just this insane talent war for them because they're those neurosurgeon types, and then the people who nail the right application and have, you just see it was the fastest growing company ever. Oh, now there's another fastest growing ever. Now there's another fastest growing company ever.
Yeah.
So I do think you can kind of go in the direction of one man, one woman, one person company, and execute on all of your ideas almost instantly and automate all the rest. Or you can go in the direction of making all those things better in very special ways. Those two will also have overlap, but
yeah,
that's how I think about developing, at least right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. In preparation for our discussion, I was, kind of trying to conceptualize some of the problems that I think at least I've observed myself, I've heard about from others. And you're kind of hitting on, I think, the making it better side of this equation. I think what I've seen most often is that folks who are trying to adopt this tooling, the road is unclear. A lot of it feels like trailblazing in 100 different places. And I was thinking, just before we had started our discussion about how, all of our kind of models of thinking, our biases and various kind of cognitive distortions and things that we bring to the table, they can change the way these tools work for us because we bring those into our discussions. So as an example, if you approach this tool with the idea that let's just say you're using Cursor or Claude Code or something for the first time, and you approach it with the idea that the thing is that this thing does is fill in the blank. Let's say it writes code for you. You give it the problem, it writes code for you, and you create this model in your mind of what the tool is supposed to do. And when it fails to do it the way that you imagined it could, you throw your hands up and kind of walk away and say, this is a lost cause. This thing is not as smart as everybody says it is. But in fact, like what you've done is you've created this very narrow window for this otherwise very broadly powerful tool to succeed or fail in. And I wonder, how much of our ability to conceptualize these tools becomes the bottleneck for the average organization to even understand what they're capable of, or how can we think about what this tool is supposed to do, or how the different applications I can bring it to. The reason one other thing that came to mind about this is like when we first there's this famous kind of story about when cars were first introduced into the market. You had, this is almost overdone at this point because it's so similar to the the anthropomorphizing of AI, but there were the car manufacturers would put fake horses on the front of it as a way of encouraging adoption and allowing people to kind of create the mental model necessary, the padding necessary to grab on to this new idea. And I wonder if we're missing some of that because of how rapidly this stuff is developing. it's hard to grasp, and therefore it feels like it's kind of passing. I imagine there's an engineer listening to this right now who resonates with what I was saying, probably a lot of them who resonate with what I'm saying about this. Like it's hard to grasp. And a lot of the time it's not doing what I want it to do. And therefore I think it's hype. I don't think it's as good as they think it is.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. This has actually been one of the most kind of fundamental problems we've had with AI for a long time, even before, when it was not very, and it wasn't good. It was actually very, very bad. When I was doing my research, one of the big ideas that I was pushing was that like we should use language to interface with these neural networks at all. It used to be more that you designed a neural network the way you would design like a machine that takes an input and has an output, and you don't get to use language to tell that machine typically, what you want from that output. That was a very foreign idea. Now we've all probably tried it with something like ChatGPT or Claude, but that entire idea was odd at some point. And your insight was exactly the way I thought about it too. We need to actually remove our conceptual biases, even in thinking about things like machine translation as a task and classifying sentences as positive or negative. Oh, that's a task. Answering questions based off of a Wikipedia paragraph. Oh, that's a task. This whole abstraction of tasks at some point appeared to me to be holding us back. It's like, why are we thinking about designing neural networks for these tasks? Or like, you would never think of them as tasks for humans. What we should be doing is teaching this neural network how to use language, so then we can describe in language what to do with language. And that's just so much more powerful. So that was a huge conceptual shift that we had to get through. That was very contentious at the time. And that continues to be, I think, one of the main limiting factors for folks interacting with AI. It's not, oh, I'm gonna put in some words and I'm gonna get an output. It's still new enough, right? That you even see this in mature technologies like Google. Like the way you type in your keywords, it will mirror things back to you. It will mirror your own cognitive biases back to you. So I think it's really crucial right now to, every time you get an output that doesn't seem right or good, high quality enough, to try to automate that entire process as well. Then ask some form of AI why. Ask it to make it better. Ask it to help you write a better prompt to get a better answer. Try to take everything that doesn't work. Basically, what I coach my engineers on is, every time you're about to do something, first see if you can get AI to do it. And then if it does, great. Now you just expanded your number of things you can offload to AI. And if AI fails, then dig in and try to figure out why. And at this stage, it may be just as valuable for you to go figure out why AI is not able to do this thing as it is for you to do it. Because if you go through that process and you find, like you're saying, that your conceptual biases are somehow holding you back, well, then again, you're back in the first camp. Well, now you've solved it. AI kind of figured out. Or maybe you're getting to something really fundamentally missing in AI, in which case,
now you've learned
a great startup idea. Maybe go work on that.
Right. Yeah. And with, I think there's this fundamental belief, and it sounds like you hold this belief. Correct me if you think this is wrong. The fundamental belief is that almost every problem, like these problems, the ones that fit in this category, should be solvable by these models or something like these models. or some kind of like structure that sits on top of them. Does that
Yeah,
sound true?
yeah. I maybe to slightly clarify, like
Yeah.
I think we both overestimate and underestimate the power of language still. Like, it's
Mm.
something that we use in everyday life as if it's not special. At the same time, we think it is something that makes us very special, even though it might not make us special. But regardless, like language and the manipulation of symbols, more broadly speaking,
Mm.
and maybe
Mm-hmm.
like the way we think about English or Spanish or something like that, just the manipulation of symbols um, is still does have these like almost magical effects, in that it can change the world. Like it
Yeah.
does change the bits and bytes and everything in the world. So think about using these language models and all of this new AI as the earliest versions of magic, and like we're just able to extend our reach with our own language out into influencing the world in this very um, um, flexible way. And it is still new, but that's an incredibly valuable skill wherever you can kind of learn a new spell that actually works, or
Mm.
dig into the alchemy of what's not working. It's not an exact science yet for many of us building with it, but I think it's a really important process to be part of and to buy into.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, I think maybe that is one of the things that, even outside of ourselves is you use the word magic, right? This idea that we've constructed, and in my head, I'm just thinking of embeddings and how powerful embeddings are just on their own. Um, this idea of like, 1400, or I don't know how large these dimensional arrays are now,
Mm-hmm.
but being able to essentially, it's almost like categorizing everything, right? Like, or like
Mm-hmm.
finding the space that everything lives in, or and anybody listening to this, I encourage you, go look up what we're talking about with embeddings. It'll make a lot more sense. But um, that there's something in that I think is certainly, we're barely touching, like you said, we're barely touching the surface of that, um,
Mm-hmm.
because it is, that underlying belief that I asserted earlier, that these should be solvable. I think that you could just proxy that to, well, how powerful is language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the more granular you get in modeling languages, then the more power and even if you were to take language out of this, just the construction of symbology, because these LLMs don't really learn one language versus another, or they don't necessarily need to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the construction of symbols together, and imbuing that with meaning,
Mm-hmm.
that to me, I think is a unique insight that, I guess, that's your earliest work probably, is centered
Mm-hmm.
on that simple assertion, that, and now this goes back to perhaps the philosophical angle here, which, you know, uh, you tell me if this is true, but the interest in language seems like a spark to lead to this.
Yeah, 100%. I think for me individually, and I think it does also just like map onto things quite well, of this connection between like thinking of language is convenient, but it is more rigorously true to think about it as like sequences of symbols.
Hmm.
Um, and in this world, as I mentioned earlier, sequences of amino acids kind of describes a language. There's some meaningful language there. There's mathematics itself is a language.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the ideas that really got me to buy into this, you mentioned embeddings and vector spaces. I think these are incredibly valuable tools for us. that's indisputable. Very valuable in AI, but also in many other areas of engineering. Packing things into small spaces is basically it's a very important tool for us conceptually too. And we can categorize, like you said, but then we also have to be wary of our categorizations, right? And allow them to change sometimes when we're wrong. You have to have this updated belief system. And yeah, it's been really interesting to see with this project, how far language can go, I guess. It's just how far this can go, this whole system of just saying, well, if I am ever confronted with a problem, something I wanted to do, whatever we wanted, and we just thought, if I could give you the right symbol to come next, and it was always the right one, then what
could you do with that? Yeah.
What isn't possible? If I was okay, how would we build a nuclear reactor, or how do I build new space technology? And if I could actually give you the right next symbol always, that was true, it does seem almost infinitely powerful in that sense, or the most powerful thing we could do. So if we can't get there, we're always approximating it, but I think there's still something in my mind that's very drawn to that, and it feels very special. Yeah. So I do think these things are going to go a lot further than we've already seen them come.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this actually ends up turning into one of my often used phrases at work as an engineering manager. I can't remember who first coined it, but the map is not the territory. Well, it seems that these LLMs are becoming just better and better maps. And you can kind of zoom in on the map a little bit with these things. It is a pretty amazing leap forward for sure. I had a similar conversation about neural networks, and I'm curious if you've ever kind of been able to put language to this, and we can probably close out with this. The idea that you have multiple layers of these nodes, and I'm talking about a very simple neural network that anybody could conceptualize, and that you go to, let's say, a second or a third layer. And with that first layer, it's fairly easy to assign a human language to what those particular nodes might represent trait-wise, right? It makes sense that if you were able to identify this particular trait in an image, then it's a square, right? You find some way of modeling that for that first trait. But as you begin to go to layer 2 and layer 3, these are, I'm not sure what the technical is, things like hyper traits or something, combined traits. It's much harder to assign an explicit label to that. But somehow, like you were saying earlier, there is meaning in there that we don't really even understand. It's difficult to understand. Have you dived into any of this, or dove into any of this kind of with other things beyond just NLP, things like neural nets? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's you mentioned these states. The language that we always kind of use to describe them would be these hidden layers, these hidden states, right? Or kind of also related to language around latent variables, these things that you can't necessarily access, but they're there. And I think for me, when I look at those, you can try to design all sorts of tools to introspect on those models, or dig into them and try to isolate which functional pathways map to which things are understandable for us.
Mm.
It's possible, sometimes you can find individual neurons in like layer 3 that, only fire when the word dog is in the sentence. You're like, huh, okay, weird. Sometimes it feels like a curiosity, sometimes it feels like an insight. I think the way that I mostly think about these things is as that's where all the concepts and all the rules get really fuzzy. So it kind of goes through this process of being very accessible to us, right? And working within our categorizations and our concepts and our biases. And then somewhere in between, you almost have to break that stuff down, right? And digest it. And then you build it back up on the other side and you generate something new. But in there, we are not always going to have words to describe it. We're not always going to be able to understand it, precisely because of what you've said, because our conceptual biases are in the way, and we don't even know which questions to ask sometimes of those things. Now we're getting better at that too. I don't think it's impossible, but we don't often know. And if you look at it, it's not going to make sense to us sometimes. Until we develop our language further and our categorizations better. But yeah, that's just that's where you throw things in and it's all mixing together. And I think some of our biases can be stripped out. And I think it's important. The most important principles in that part of the process are to have really, really good information flow. So maybe this is one for the engineering managers and directors. I like to think of designing organizations or the way that I would design neural networks. You need really good information flow. Even if, two nodes in the network look like they're far apart, when you draw them on paper, you still need strong connections between them. If you add too many layers, then signal is hard to get all the way down from the top layers to the bottom layers or the bottom layers to the top layers. Sometimes we use something called skip connections to kind of skip over some of the layers and connect the ones at the top to the ones at the bottom so information can flow more freely. Sometimes we we use this idea of attention. So nodes pay attention to other nodes in different ways. And that intention flow is really important. And ultimately, the objective that the neural network is trained on is extremely important. And neural networks, as you train them, converge to one solution, which just suggests that at the start, they're mostly random numbers. And then based on the objective and the data that you give them, they start to solidify or codify kind of the principles from that data that would allow them to succeed on the objective, at least as much as possible. And the way that happens is one layer, the bottom layers, converge first. They stop changing. And then the ones above that, and then the ones above that. And the ones kind of closest to the objective usually are changing last. And then they're also the easiest to change, if the objective changes. So I think it's, even if you aren't an expert in neural networks, maybe looking at some of the research about how they learn, I think that actually gives us really good principles for ourselves individually and how we can learn. Our core beliefs are much harder to change, the lower levels of the neural network that are closer to those embeddings. The things in the middle, are easier to change. The things related to my current objective, maybe easier to change. And that's true for organizations too. So I really think there's something we can learn from how AI learns that's broadly applicable to ourselves and organizations as well. It's very neat to try that out and see if you can use that to help your organizations learn through this entire process as all this AI stuff is happening.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I think most people listening to this, the insight there for me is we have thought about these models as trying to emulate us. Or at least that is that's the common perception, is that, oh, a neural net is so powerful because we figured out some way that we imagine that the brain, these neurons work in a similar way. You have activation and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is like, well, actually, we could design a neural net that we want to emulate at a more meta level. Of course, we can't decide how our neurons activate, but if we were to use this as a mental model for a larger process, we actually get better results out of that. Which I think is backwards from what most people imagine the insight to be from AI. Oh, we need to work on this thing and make it more like us. Maybe the better thing to do here is to adjust something to be more like it.
Yep, I think that's right.
Very
I
interesting.
think it's very natural for us as AI, came for our games and it came for our language. Maybe it's coming for some of our jobs. Sometimes that's related to our identities, our sense of purpose, maybe our sense of meaning. A lot of people get these things from their work and the people that they're working with. And yeah, maybe this whole process of moving the goalposts and trying to like run away from AI and like protect something. Oh, it's our language now. It's just in our intelligence, and maybe there's something else that we can hold out for. Maybe that process is kind of playing out and is almost over. And instead, just like you said, we shouldn't be trying to necessarily make AI more like us in this case. Like we should be being more like AI. Maybe that's the answer to unlocking the next phase of whatever humanity is.
Yeah.
And the next stage in our search for meaning.
Yeah, there's so much more that we could dive into here, Bryan. Thank you so much for your time today. I want to give you a chance to let folks know anything that you you would like for them to go and check out, first of all. But then secondly, I have one final question for you. So let's start with that though. Where can people find you? What can they learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah. So, I'm primarily working on you.com right now, just you.com. You can find me on, social media, broadly speaking. Like follow my LinkedIn for work stuff and a lot of thoughts around things like this. I'm not super active on X. And if you want to check out my paintings and the art side, I'm on Instagram too. But my website also has some thoughts and ways to reach out to me if you'd like to talk more. I do love conversations like this. A lot of fun essays from 10 years ago when I feel like a lot of this stuff was getting started. But you.com is the main project right now, and you can keep an eye out for some things I'll be doing with TED AI coming up in the next couple months. We're going to be doing something there on the philosophy of AI. That might be a fun conversation if folks have liked this one. Yeah.
Excellent. Very cool. Last question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to the engineers, the managers, directors, whoever is listening to this show right now, what would you tell them?
Focus on learning, but make sure you're working on the things that you really believe in and that you're passionate about, that you believe are going to have the most impact, because I think those are the areas where you'll naturally be able to learn the most. And as AI automates more and more things, I would love to see your intuition develop around the highest possible impact you could have, and then see what some of our listeners end up doing as they can create entire companies and and it gets easier and easier to change the world. I hope you're thinking about the ideals that the values that you'd like to see in the world, and I'll be curious to see what they all build.
Fantastic. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you too. Good conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Developer Tea, the second part of my interview with Bryan McCann. If you only listened to the second part, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to the first part as well. It's a great discussion, and we kind of follow suit with the style of discussion in the second part. So thank you again to Bryan for joining me on today's episode, and to U.com. As a point of clarity, U.com did not pay for any part of this interview. It was just a discussion between Bryan and I. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, enjoy your tea.